You've probably seen the movie. A betrayed Roman general, forced into slavery, who becomes a gladiator. He fights for honor, avenges his family, and ultimately challenges an empire. A heroic tale. A beautiful image. Now, throw that image away. The truth about Roman gladiators is less like an epic poem and more like a brutal contact sport, sponsored by corporations and politicians. Forget fighting for honor. This was the world's first bloody entertainment industry. Gladiators were not free heroes. They were expensive assets, owned by entrepreneurs called lanistas. They were bought, sold, trained, and rented out to perform at events we would now call pay-per-view. The only difference was, the price paid was sometimes their own life. They were superstar athletes who were also, simultaneously, death row inmates. Tonight, we will not watch them from the high seats of the Colosseum. We will go down below, to where the sand, sweat, and blood mix as one. Where legends were forged, and bodies were broken. Welcome back, curious night owls, to Sleepy History Narratives. I am your narrator. Your guide into the hilariously horrifying corners of the past. It is wonderful to have you here tonight. Our community is growing every day, a collection of inquisitive souls from all over the world. All looking for a different way to unwind. And speaking of which, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are, down in the comments. From the sleepless streets of New York, to the calm shores of California, or a city on the other side of the globe. It's always fascinating to know that as one of us is getting ready for bed, another is just starting their day, yet we are all connected by these stories. And if you enjoy these unique historical journeys, a like on the video and a subscription to the channel would be a priceless source of energy for us to keep lighting these torches into the past. Thank you so much for your support. And now, our familiar ritual begins. Find a comfortable position. Perhaps lying in bed, or settled into a soft chair. Dim the lights in your room just a little. If you have a fan, turn it on for that soft background hum. Take a deep breath in, hold it for a moment, and slowly let it out. Let the worries of the present world dissolve. The unread emails. The meetings for tomorrow. The bills that need to be paid. Set them aside for now. They belong to another world, not the one we are about to enter. Tonight, you will not be a spectator in the stands. You will not be eating grapes and cheering. Tonight, you will be the merchandise. You will be the one standing on the sand. So, close your eyes. Relax. And let my voice be your guide. You are no longer here. You are somewhere else, in another time. Your old life is over. You no longer remember how long you have been walking. The days of being shackled, of being dragged along the dusty roads of Italy, have blurred together into a haze of exhaustion and humiliation. You only know that the deep forests of Gaul, your home, are now a distant memory. You were once a free warrior. Now, you are spoils of war. And you have just been sold. Your new master does not lead you to a slave market or a farm. He leads you to a place where the air smells of sweat, of fear, and of dried blood. Even while outside the high stone walls, you can hear the sounds from within. The clang of metal. The guttural grunts of men in exertion. And sometimes, the sharp crack of a whip through the air, followed by a stifled cry. You arrive before a massive wooden gate, reinforced with thick iron bars. The gate groans open, heavy and slow, like the mouth of a monster. You are shoved inside, and the gate slams shut behind you. That thump is the final punctuation mark on your old life. Welcome to the Ludus. The Gladiator School. The forge of the god of death. The first thing you notice is the vast training yard of packed earth. The ground is hard and uneven, stained a dark brown by sweat and perhaps other things you do not wish to consider. Under the harsh sun, dozens of shirtless men are training. They swing wooden swords against posts, their muscles straining. A few others are sparring, the sound of wood on shield creating a brutal rhythm. They do not look like soldiers. They move with the efficiency of killers and the desperation of the condemned. Your shackles are removed. For a fleeting moment, you feel a sense of relief. But that freedom is an illusion. You are immediately flanked by 2 large guards and marched to a corner of the yard. Here, the stripping process begins. Your clothes, the tattered leather tunic of a Gaulish warrior, are torn from your body. Your hair, which you had worn long with pride, is crudely shorn off with a dull knife, leaving a patchy, ragged scalp. Everything that connected you to your former self is taken away. You are no longer a warrior of your tribe. You have no name. You are only a body. A piece of property. And the owner of that property is approaching. He is the lanista, the master and head trainer of this school. He is not as large as the guards. But there is something in his eyes that makes all fall silent as he passes. He circles you, silent. His eyes do not look at you. They appraise you. They scan your old battle scars like a farmer assessing a bull for purchase. He uses his rough fingers to squeeze the muscles in your arms and shoulders. He forces your mouth open to inspect your teeth. The feeling is horrifying. It is absolute dehumanization. You were once a man who commanded fear on the battlefield. Now, you are an animal. A piece of merchandise being inspected for quality before being put to use. You want to resist, to roar, but his cold gaze and the presence of the 2 guards extinguish all intent. After his inspection, the lanista gives a satisfied nod. Good, he says, his voice dry. Good frame. Has seen battle. But forget everything you know. He steps closer, leaning into your ear. There is no honor here. There is no glory in how you fight. There is only one rule: make the crowd scream. Entertain them. And survive to fight another day. Do that, and you will have food, wine, and perhaps women. Fail, and the sand of the arena will drink your blood. He steps back. Your old name died with the world outside. Here, you will be called by a new one. We will see what name you earn after your first training session. With a flick of his hand, he signals to the guards. You are shoved forward, towards a long, low building at the far end of the yard. The barracks. The gate has closed behind you. The old world is gone. Your new life, among men as cursed as you, is about to begin. You are shoved forward, away from the yard, towards a long, low building of dark stone. The heavy wooden door groans open, and you are pushed inside. The world of sun and sand and open air is gone. Here, a long, narrow hall stretches out before you, lit by a few sputtering torches that cast long, dancing shadows on the damp walls. On either side of the hall are small, dark openings, like the mouths of caves. These are the celli. The cells. Your new home. The air in here is different. It is thick, heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale sweat, old straw. And something else, a metallic, coppery tang that you know all too well from the battlefield. Underneath it all is a current of despair, so palpable you can almost taste it. Men are here. Dozens of them. Some are lying on the floor of their cells. Some are sitting on benches, sharpening wooden swords. Some are just staring into nothingness. They are a menagerie of the Roman Empire's conquests. You see broad-shouldered Thracians, dark-skinned Numidians, and other Gauls like yourself, their faces a mask of sullen resentment. As you are led down the hall, they stop what they are doing. They look at you. It is not a look of welcome. It is not a look of pity. It is the silent, predatory assessment of an animal sizing up a newcomer in its cage. They are looking at your muscles. They are looking at your old scars. They are judging your strength, your weaknesses. They are wondering if you will be a threat, or if you will be fresh meat. You see the unspoken hierarchy. There are the veterans, the veterani, the men with a network of scars and a cold, dead look in their eyes. They barely glance at you. You are beneath their notice. Then there are the rookies, the Tyrones, like you, their fear still fresh, trying desperately to look tough. You are at the bottom of this new world. Less than nothing. A guard shoves you towards one of the dark openings. In here, he grunts. Your cell is a small box of stone. Barely large enough to lie down in. There is no door, only the opening. There is no bed, only a thin pallet of straw on the floor. It smells of damp and old misery. This is it. This is your entire world now. You sit down on the straw. It crackles beneath your weight. For a moment, you are left alone. The sounds of the barracks wash over you, a cough from a nearby cell. The low murmur of men speaking in languages you don't understand, the distant, rhythmic thud of the training swords outside. A different figure appears at your cell opening. He is not a guard. He is older, his body lean and corded with muscle, his face a roadmap of old scars. This is a doctor, one of the trainers. He holds a small wooden tablet. He looks you over again. Not with the calculating eye of the lanista, but with the practical eye of a craftsman assessing his raw materials. He doesn't ask for your name. He doesn't care what your name was. Your name belonged to a free man, and that man is gone. He looks at you, at your build, at the memory of your tribe still in your features. You are a Gaul, he says, his Latin rough. From now on. You are Gallus. Gallus. The Gaul. Not a name. A label. A category. It is the final act of erasure. The person you were has been completely stripped away, and this new hollow shell has been given a tag for the convenience of its owners. Your real name dies in your throat, unspoken. You want to protest, to scream that you are more than this. But you look into the trainer's dead eyes and you know it is useless. Here, you are what they say you are. He makes a mark on his tablet and walks away without another word. You are left in the growing darkness of your cell. Gallus. The name echoes in the silence of your mind. It is foreign. It is empty. But it is the only thing you own now. And tonight, it will be your only companion in the dark. You sit in the darkness of your cell for what feels like an eternity. The world outside your small opening is a stage of strange and brutal rituals. You are no longer a participant in life. You are a spectator of your own captivity. Then, a new sound cuts through the air. Not a command, not a whip, but the dull, echoing blast of a horn. Instantly, the men in the barracks begin to stir. There is no excitement, no chatter. Just a weary, mechanical movement. They file out of their cells and form a line in the central hall. You watch for a moment. Then realize this is expected of you, too. You rise, your muscles aching, and join the end of the silent procession. The line shuffles towards a large, open archway that leads to a communal refectory. In the center of the room, a huge iron cauldron steams over a low fire. A single, sweating man, a slave like you but with the dull eyes of a lifer, ladles a thick gray paste into rough-hewn wooden bowls. As you get closer, you can smell it. It doesn't smell like food. It smells like boiled grains and resignation. You are handed a bowl. It is heavy. The contents are a thick, lumpy porridge, the color of wet stone. This is your first meal as a gladiator. You find a space on a bench and sit. Around you, men are eating with a grim efficiency. Their faces blank. There is no conversation. The only sound is the scraping of wooden spoons against wooden bowls. You take your first spoonful. It is tasteless. And yet, it is also disgusting. The texture is gritty, as if mixed with sand. It is bland, but with an underlying sourness from having simmered for too long. You remember the roasted boar and rich stews of your tribe, the taste of wild berries and honey. That memory is a phantom, a ghost that makes this gray paste in your mouth an even greater insult. You choke it down. Not for pleasure. Not for nourishment. But for fuel. Because you know you will need it. You think you are being fed this slop because you are a slave, because it is cheap. You are only half right. The diet of a gladiator is a science. A brutal, calculated science. They call gladiators horderii. The barley eaters. Your diet will consist almost entirely of barley, beans, and oats. A high-carbohydrate, low-quality meal. Why? To make you fat. Not obese, but to build a thick layer of subcutaneous fat over your muscles. The lanista, your owner, is not just a trainer. He is a cynical investor. He knows that this layer of fat serves a purpose in the arena. It protects your underlying muscles and nerves from superficial cuts. It makes the fights bloodier. More spectacular for the crowd, creating gushing wounds that look horrific but do not immediately disable you. You are being fattened like a hog for slaughter. Not to be eaten. But to bleed more beautifully for the entertainment of others. To accompany your meal, you are given a cup of a murky, grayish liquid. You take a sip. It is vile. It tastes of ash and vinegar. This, you will learn, is a drink made of water and wood ash, a folk remedy believed to strengthen your bones and help you recover faster from injury. It is a primitive form of calcium supplement. You look at the gray gruel in your bowl. You look at the cup of ash water. This is not the diet of a warrior. This is the diet of a product. An investment. Your body is no longer your own. It is a canvas upon which the lanista will paint a spectacle of blood. You are being scientifically engineered for a more dramatic death. The meal is over as quickly as it began. The empty bowls are collected. The men shuffle back towards their cells. There is no feeling of satisfaction. Only the feeling of a heavy, indigestible mass settling in your stomach. The energy, however meager, has been consumed. Now, it is time to spend it. A horn blasts again through the ludus. This time, its call is sharper, more urgent. It is not the call to eat. It is the call to train. The heavy, tasteless meal sits in your stomach like a stone. There is no time for digestion, no moment of rest. The sharp, urgent blast of a horn sounds again. And the guards herd you and the other new recruits, the Tyrones, back out into the sun-scorched training yard. The veterans watch from the shade of the barracks. Their expressions a mixture of pity and contempt. They have been through this. They know what is coming. You are lined up and handed your first tools. Not the sharp steel of a warrior, but the crude instruments of a student in the art of death. First, a shield. It is not the large, sturdy shield you once carried into battle. It is a parma, a smaller, round or oblong shield made of wicker and covered in leather. It is light, but it feels flimsy, more like a suggestion of protection than a real defense. Then, you are given a sword. A rudis. It is a wooden sword, but any thought of safety vanishes the moment you hold it. It is heavy, poorly balanced, and thick as a club. It is designed not for elegant fencing, but for bludgeoning. For building the brute strength needed to swing real steel for hours. It feels dead in your hand. An insult to the fine blade you once owned. Your trainer, the same scarred man who gave you your new name, directs you to your first opponent. It is not another man. It is a post. A thick wooden stake, about 6 feet tall. driven deep into the hard-packed earth. This is the Paulus. It is your most patient teacher and your most unforgiving adversary. It does not move. It does not feel. It does not tire. It is the perfect opponent for a man who is meant to become a thing. The post is your enemy, the trainer's voice cuts through the air. He has a head, a throat, a chest, and legs. Learn them. Strike them. Until your arms feel like they are filled with lead. And so, the dance begins. You approach the Paulus, adopting the fighting stance you know from the battles in your homeland. The trainer is on you in an instant. A sharp rap from his long wooden rod, a vitus, strikes your legs. Your stance is too wide. You are a warrior, not a farmer planting seeds. Feet closer. Shield up. His rod taps your shield, hard. A constant, annoying reminder. Shield up. Shield up. Always. Now, strike. You raise the heavy wooden sword. It feels awkward. Like an extension of someone else's arm. You swing, aiming for the head of the post. The impact is a dull, unsatisfying thud. A jarring shock travels up your arm. Again. You swing again. Thud. Your muscles, already weary from the march and the construction, begin to burn. Again. Faster. Do you want the crowd to fall asleep? Thud. 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 The rhythm is grueling. It is not the fluid dance of real combat, the give and take of a duel. It is mindless, repetitive labor. Your instincts scream at you to move, to circle, to find an opening. But the post offers no opening. It only stands there, accepting your blows. You are not learning how to fight. You are being unlearned. Every instinct you have from real battle, every clever feint, every swift maneuver, is being beaten out of you. Here, there is only brute force and stamina. The sun beats down. Sweat mixes with the dust on your skin, creating a gritty film. Your throat is dry again. The blister on your heel throbs with every shift of your weight. The trainer circles you like a wolf, his rod a constant threat. Your shield is too low, Gallus. Do you want them to cut your belly open and show the crowd your lunch? Rap. Your swing is too slow. A child could block that. Rap. Keep your feet moving. You are a dancer of death, not a statue. Rap. The pain from the rod is sharp, but the pain in your muscles is a deep, burning fire. Your shoulders scream. Your back aches. Your hand, gripping the rough wooden hilt of the rudis, is raw with new blisters forming over the old ones. You look at the other rookies. They are all in the same state of misery. A symphony of grunts, thuds, and the sharp crack of the trainer's rods. This is the reality of the ludus. It is not a place where heroes are made. It is a factory where raw human material is hammered into a product fit for the arena. Hours pass. Or perhaps it is only minutes. Time has become a blur of pain and repetition. You stop thinking. Your mind goes blessedly blank. There is only the post, the sword, the burn in your muscles, and the voice of the trainer. Raise. Strike. Block. Move. Raise. Strike. Block. Move. You are being broken down. Deconstructed. Emptied of all that you were. You think you have reached the limit of your endurance. You think you cannot possibly lift the wooden sword one more time. Then the trainer calls a halt. You lean on the post, gasping for air, your entire body trembling with exhaustion. You think it is over. A moment of relief washes over you. You are wrong. The fight against the wooden post is over. Now begins the fight against flesh and bone. You think you have reached the limit of your endurance. You believe you cannot possibly lift the heavy wooden sword one more time. You are wrong. The trainer, his face an unreadable mask of stone, does not dismiss you. Instead, he gestures towards the center of the yard, where a large circle has been drawn in the dirt. He points at you, and then at another rookie. A Thracian. With wild hair and eyes that burn with the same mix of fear and defiance as your own. You too, the trainer barks. Inside the circle. First blood, or first man down, ends it. You step into the circle. The dust rises around your battered feet. You and the Thracian circle each other slowly. He is as exhausted as you are. You can see it in the way he holds his wicker shield. A little too low. You can see it in the sweat that drips from his chin. You are two broken animals, forced to dance for a new master. The horn sounds. The fight begins. He lunges first, a clumsy, desperate swing. You easily parry it with your shield, the impact of wood on wood jarring your already aching arm. Your old instincts, the instincts of a real warrior, flare to life. This is familiar territory. This is the dance you know. You ignore the exhaustion. You ignore the pain. Your mind becomes sharp, clear. You are no longer a slave hitting a post. You are a warrior again. You see the openings his fatigue creates. The way his shield drops after a swing. The way his footing is unsteady. You parry another of his attacks, and then you see it. A perfect, clean opening. His side is exposed for a fraction of a second. In a real battle, this is the moment that decides life or death. You do not hesitate. You pivot. Putting your weight into the blow, and bring your heavy wooden sword crashing against his ribs. There is a sickening crack of wood against bone. The Thracian gasps, the air driven from his lungs. And crumples to the ground, clutching his side. He lies there, panting in the dust. You stand over him, your chest heaving, the wooden sword held ready. You have won. A flicker of your old pride. The pride of a Gaulish warrior, sparks within you. You look to the trainer, expecting a nod of approval. A word of praise. Instead, you feel a blinding, searing pain across your back. Crack. The trainer's rod has struck you with its full force. The pain is so intense, it steals your breath and sends you stumbling to your knees. Get up, he screams. His voice is not merely angry. It is filled with a cold, terrifying fury. You look up, confused, the pain clouding your vision. He stands over you, his shadow falling across your body. Did I tell you to win? He snarls. His face inches from yours. Did I tell you to end it so quickly? Do you think you are in some forest, fighting for your tribe? Crack. The rod strikes your shoulders. You are not a warrior. You are a performer. Your life belongs to me, but your death belongs to the crowd. He leans in closer, his voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. The people of Rome do not pay to see a 10-second fight. They do not pay for efficiency. They pay for a spectacle. They pay for a struggle. For sweat. For desperation. For the hope of a comeback. And the thrill of a final, bloody blow. Your job is not to win quickly. Your job is to make them feel something. To give them their money's worth. A long fight is a good fight. Do you understand? You can only nod, your body trembling from the pain and the shock of this revelation. Help him up, the trainer commands, gesturing to the Thracian who is slowly getting to his feet, wincing. You stumble over and help your opponent stand. You look into each other's eyes, and for the first time, you see not an enemy, but a fellow prisoner. You share a silent understanding. Again. The trainer barks. And you fight again. But this time, it is a different fight. It is a lie. You trade blows, but your swings are wider, more dramatic. You block a strike that you could have easily dodged, letting the wooden swords clash with a loud, satisfying thwack. You take a hit on your shield that makes you stagger back, even though it barely hurt. You are no longer fighting. You are acting. You are learning the choreography of violence. You are learning to make pain look beautiful. The horn sounds, signaling the end of the training day. You and the Thracian stop, leaning on each other for support, two puppets whose strings have been cut. You limp back to your cell. Your body a canvas of new bruises and old aches. The physical pain is immense, but it is nothing compared to the death of something inside you. You have learned the most important lesson of the day. The honor of a warrior is dead. It has no place here. Now, all that remains is the calculation of a performer. So, you have learned the first and most brutal rule of the ludus: it is not a fight, it is a performance. Your honor as a warrior is dead. All that remains is the cold calculation of an entertainer. But every performance needs a cast of characters. And the Roman arena had a cast more varied, more bizarre, and more specialized than any stage play. This was not simply man versus man. It was style versus style. It was a deadly, complex game of rock paper scissors, but with more tridents. To understand this world, you must understand its archetypes. Think of them as character classes in the world's most dangerous video game, each with their own unique weapons, armor, and special abilities. Let us begin with the strangest of them all. The outlier. The one who brought the tools of a fisherman to a sword fight. Meet the retiarius. The net man. When you picture a gladiator, you picture a man of steel and bronze. A heavy shield. A sharp sword, a helmet hiding a grimacing face. The retiarius had none of these. He was the antithesis of the classic gladiator image, and for that reason, he was both despised and adored. His equipment was a bizarre collection of things that had no business being in a military arena. His primary weapon was the reti, a weighted casting net, much like one used for fishing. It was not designed to kill. It was designed to entangle, to immobilize, to turn his heavily armed opponent into a clumsy, struggling mess. A successful throw of the net was the prelude to victory, wrapping his foe in a web of rope and helplessness. His main killing instrument was the fascina, a long, three-pronged trident. It was a weapon of distance, allowing him to poke, jab, and harass his opponent from afar, keeping the deadly short sword of his enemy at bay. With its sharp tines, it was brutally effective against an unprotected body. And for close encounters, a last resort, he carried a short dagger, a pugio. If his net failed, if his trident was lost, this was his final, desperate argument. But what truly defined the retiarius was what he lacked. He had no helmet. In an arena where head blows were common, this was a terrifying vulnerability. But it was also a key part of his appeal. The crowd could see his face. They could see his fear, his desperation, his triumph. He was not an anonymous machine of death, he was a relatable, identifiable human being. Which made his potential death all the more personal for the spectators. He had no shield. His only defense was his speed and agility. His only armor was a simple loincloth. An arm guard called a manica on his left arm, and a tall metal shoulder guard called a gallerus, which protected his neck and the side of his face. He was practically naked. A fighter of pure speed and evasion. His fighting style was therefore completely different. He did not march forward into glorious combat. He danced. He retreated. He circled his opponent, a constant, annoying presence, always moving, always looking for an opening to cast his net. His strategy was to tire out the heavily armored foe, to frustrate him, to make him make a mistake. For some in the crowd, this was seen as cowardly, even effeminate. They came to see two warriors clash, not to watch one man run away from another. The retiarius was often the heel. The villain of the story, the tricky fighter that the crowd loved to hate. But for others, the match of a retiarius was the ultimate spectacle. The unique drama of the nimble. Lightly armed fisherman against a hulking, heavily armed warrior was a guaranteed show. It was a contest of speed versus power, of trickery versus brute force. Would the net find its mark? Or would the swordsman finally close the distance and end the dance with one brutal swing? The retiarius was a testament to the Roman genius for entertainment. They understood that variety was key. A whole day of sword and shield versus sword and shield would be boring. But throwing a net-wielding, trident-poking wild card into the mix? That was good television. He was a high-risk, high-reward performer. Vulnerable, but deadly. Despised, but unforgettable. But every fighting style in this deadly ecosystem has its counter. A natural predator designed specifically to hunt it. And for the quick, evasive fishermen of the arena, Rome created the ultimate hunter. So, you have the retiarius. The dancer, the trickster, the fisherman of the arena. A fighter so unique, so vulnerable, so strange. In any balanced system, a creature like this cannot exist without a natural predator, a countermove specifically designed to neutralize its strengths. The Roman public demanded this balance. They demanded a good show. And a fight where a man with a net simply runs around for an hour is not a good show. So, Rome engineered the perfect predator. Enter the secutor. His name literally means, the pursuer. If the retiarius was a complex question, the secutor was a simple, brutal answer. His entire existence, his very design, was a direct response to the netman. He was the anti-retiarius. His equipment was a fortress of bronze and steel. He carried the large, rectangular shield of the Roman legionary, the scutum. It was a walking wall, behind which he could safely advance. Protected from the jabs of the long trident. His weapon was the gladius, the classic Roman short sword. Not a weapon of range, but a ruthlessly efficient tool for stabbing and slashing in close quarters. Once the secutor closed the distance, the gladius was almost impossible to defend against. But his most important, most brilliantly designed piece of equipment was his helmet. The helmet of a secutor was unlike any other. It was smooth, rounded, and almost featureless, like a polished metal egg. It had no crests. No sharp edges, no ornamentation whatsoever. Why? So that the net of the retiarius would have nothing to catch on. It would simply slide off, rendering the netman's primary weapon useless. Furthermore, the helmet had only two, very small, circular eye holes. This severely restricted the secutor's vision and hearing, making him feel like he was fighting from inside a hot, stuffy echo chamber of his own breathing. But it offered unparalleled protection against the sharp prongs of a trident, which could not fit through the small openings. Every single piece of his gear was a carefully crafted counterargument to the retiarius. Closely related to the secutor was another heavyweight class, the murmillo. His name likely came from a Greek word for a type of saltwater fish. He was also heavily armed, but his helmet was larger, with a wider brim and often a distinctive fish-shaped crest on top. When a murmillo was pitted against a retiarius, the symbolism was obvious and delicious to the Roman crowd. It was the fisherman hunting the fish. A piece of live, bloody theater. The fighting style of the secutor and the murmillo was the complete opposite of the retiarius's dance. There was no retreat. There was no evasion. There was only a slow, relentless, forward pressure. He was a walking tank. A human battering ram. His goal was to use his large shield to absorb the trident's jabs while continuously closing the distance. He would cut off the arena, cornering the fast-moving retiarius, forcing him to fight, to stop dancing. The secutor's fight was a test of stamina and pressure. He had to endure the harassment, ignore the pokes and prods, and wait for that one moment when the retiarius was too slow, too tired, or too close. For the crowd, this was the classic, archetypal matchup. Good versus evil. Brawn versus brains. The straightforward, heavily armored hero versus the tricky, half-naked villain. They understood this narrative. They roared when the secutor's shield deflected the trident. They gasped when the retiarius narrowly dodged a sword thrust. They cheered when the net was finally cast. The entire performance was a masterpiece of manufactured conflict. The Romans didn't just throw two men into an arena. They created a story, with characters, roles, and a built-in dramatic tension. The secutor was the unstoppable force. The retiarius was the uncatchable object. The fight was a physical representation of that paradox. These heavily armed warriors, the secutors and murmillos, were the embodiment of Roman martial might. They were what most people thought of when they heard the word gladiator. Strong, armored, and deadly. A symbol of masculine power. But was this brutal stage only for men? On rare, shocking, and often controversial occasions, women also entered the sand, armed and ready to fight. The arena, then, was a stage for these hypermasculine archetypes. The heavily armed murmillo, a walking fortress of steel. The nimble retiarius, a trickster with a net and trident. A brutal and bloody theater of manhood. But was this stage only for men? History, it turns out, enjoys a plot twist. On rare, shocking, and deeply controversial occasions, women also entered the sand. They were called gladiatrices. Female gladiators. The very idea was an affront to the Roman sense of order. In a society where a woman's place was defined by domestic virtue, modesty, loyalty, motherhood, the sight of a woman bearing arms, sweating and bleeding for the entertainment of a crowd, was seen by many traditionalists as a sign of profound moral decay. And yet, it happened. Emperors like Nero and Domitian, always seeking new and exotic spectacles to thrill a jaded public, would sometimes stage these bouts as a special novelty. The evidence is scarce, but it is undeniable. The Roman historian Tacitus wrote of women of distinguished rank fighting in the arena during Nero's reign. The poet Juvenal wrote with scorn about wealthy women who would train at the ludus, learning the art of the sword, disgracing their families. But the most powerful proof we have is not a text, but a stone carving. A marble relief, discovered in Halicarnassus, dating to the 2nd century AD. It depicts two women locked in combat. They are powerfully built, wearing the same minimal armor as many of their male counterparts, loincloths, arm guards, and leg guards. They carry large shields and short swords. Crucially, they wear no helmets, their faces and hair visible, a common practice for this type of spectacle to emphasize their gender. Beneath their feet, their stage names are carved in Greek. One is named Achillea, a reference to the greatest Greek warrior of all, Achilles. The other is Amazonia, evoking the mythical race of warrior women. And the inscription tells us one more thing. They were granted a draw, an honorable release, missio. They had fought so bravely, so skillfully, that both were allowed to live. This small stone carving is a window into a forgotten world, a testament to two women who achieved a warrior's honor in a world that tried to deny them any. How did they fight? We can only speculate. They likely fought each other, as pitting a woman against a man in a serious fight would have been seen as a farce. They may have reenacted mythological battles, particularly those involving the Amazons. They were a special attraction. A bizarre and sensational interruption to the usual program of male-on-male combat. For the crowd, the reaction was likely mixed. A cocktail of shock, fascination, and moral outrage. It was a spectacle that broke all the rules, and for that reason alone, it was unforgettable. These women, whether they were slaves forced to fight, or thrill-seeking aristocrats defying convention, remain one of history's most compelling footnotes. They were a paradox, fighting in a world that did not want them, and proving that the thirst for spectacle could override even Rome's most deeply entrenched traditions. Most gladiators, however, male or female, fought and died in relative obscurity, their stage names forgotten as soon as the sand was raked clean. But one man's name would echo through eternity. Not for how he performed in the arena, but for how he broke free from it, and nearly brought the Roman Republic to its knees. His name was Spartacus. Most gladiators, whether male or female, were footnotes in history, their stories ending in the anonymous sand of the arena. They were performers, products, forgotten as soon as the games were over. But history sometimes makes exceptions. Sometimes, a fire burns so brightly that not even the weight of an empire can extinguish it. Sometimes, a man becomes more than a man. He becomes a legend. His story begins not in Rome, but in the rugged, wild mountains of Thrace, a region in the Balkans feared by the Romans for the ferocity of its warriors. His name was Spartacus. We do not know for certain who he was before Rome gave him that name. The records are fragmented, contradictory, shrouded in the mists of history. Some accounts, like those of the historian Appian, say he was a Thracian who had once fought for Rome as an auxiliary soldier, only to desert and become a bandit before being captured. Others, like Plutarch, suggest he was a man of noble birth, a leader captured while fighting against the Roman legions. Was he a traitor to the Republic, or a patriot fighting for his own people? Perhaps it does not matter. The outcome was the same. He was a free man, a skilled warrior, and Rome took that freedom away. Imagine him. Not as the anonymous Gaul you were in our first story, but as a seasoned soldier, a man who understood strategy, who knew the feel of a real sword in his hand and the thrill of a real battle cry in his throat. Now imagine that man in chains. Imagine the long, humiliating march to Rome, surrounded by legionaries who were once his allies or his respected enemies. Imagine the loss of his name, his tribe, his identity. Imagine arriving at a Roman slave market, a place where human beings are paraded and sold like livestock. He is stood upon a wooden block. Men walk around him, inspecting his teeth, his muscles, his old battle scars. They are not looking at a man. They are looking at an investment, a potential source of profit. And on that day, he catches the eye of a man named Lentulus Batiatus. Batiatus was a lanista, the owner of one of the most famous gladiator schools in Capua, a city just south of Rome. He was a businessman in the trade of death and entertainment. And when he looked at Spartacus, he didn't see a broken slave. He saw raw material of the highest quality. He saw the defiant fire in his eyes. He saw the body of a trained warrior. He understood that this man's rage and skill, if properly channeled, could create a spectacle in the arena that would make him rich. So, the deal was made. Spartacus was sold. Not to work in a mine or a field, but to be trained for the sands. He walked through the same gates you did. He was led into the same kind of dusty yard. He was stripped of his clothes. His hair was shorn, and he was thrown into a dark cell. He was fed the same tasteless barley gruel, designed to fatten and strengthen the body for a more spectacular death. He was handed a wooden sword and told to forget everything he knew about real combat. The lanista and his trainers tried to break him, to erase the Thracian warrior and forge a Roman performer in his place. They tried to empty him of his past, his pride, his very soul. But unlike the thousands of others who were broken by this place, something inside Spartacus refused to die. A fire was not being extinguished. It was being banked, compressed, waiting for the right moment, the right spark, to explode into an inferno that would threaten to burn Rome itself to the ground. The days and the ludus of Batiatus bled into one another. A monotonous cycle of tasteless food, grueling training, and the ever-present threat of a violent death in front of a cheering crowd. The trainers worked to shape Spartacus into a performer, to channel his rage into a spectacle. They succeeded in making him a formidable gladiator. But they failed to extinguish the man he once was. Beneath the surface of this brutal monotony, a dangerous idea was taking root. It started in whispers, in shared glances of defiance across the training yard. Spartacus, with his natural authority and military mind, became a quiet leader. He found allies in other captured warriors, particularly a Gaul named Crixus and a man named Enemaus. They were all different men from different lands, but they shared one thing in common: they remembered what it was like to be free. They were not just slaves. They were prisoners of war. And they began to plot. The plan was desperate, almost suicidal. To break out of a fortified school, in the middle of a Roman city, armed with nothing. But the alternative was to continue living as property, to die for the amusement of their captors. For men like Spartacus, a quick death fighting for freedom was better than a long life in chains. The spark came from an unexpected place. The kitchen. One day, while working their duties, a group of about 200 gladiators saw their chance. The tools of their servitude, they realized, could also be the tools of their liberation. They did not rise with swords and shields. They rose with kitchen knives, meat cleavers, and long, sharp cooking spits. The uprising was sudden and ferocious. A chaotic explosion of pent-up fury. They swarmed the guards, who were caught completely by surprise, expecting only the usual sullen obedience. A guard who raised a whip was met with a roasting spit to the chest. A trainer who drew his sword was overwhelmed by 3 men armed with chopping knives. It was not a clean or noble fight. It was a messy, desperate jailbreak. The sounds of the kitchen, the chopping of vegetables, the sizzle of meat, were replaced by the clang of stolen metal against armor and the shouts of men tasting freedom for the first time in years. They fought their way out of the kitchens, out into the training yard. The other gladiators, seeing the revolt, were frozen for a moment between fear of punishment and the electrifying hope of escape. Some joined the fray. Spartacus and his core group knew they couldn't stay. They had to get out of the city. As they fought their way towards the main gate, fate handed them a gift. They stumbled upon a wagon that was on its way to another city, a wagon filled with real gladiatorial weapons and armor. They seized it without hesitation. Suddenly, they were no longer a mob of slaves with kitchen utensils. They were an armed, albeit small, force. They donned the very helmets and greaves meant for their performances in the arena, but now they would use them for a real war. They smashed their way through the gates of the Ludus and poured into the streets of Capua, causing panic and confusion among the citizens. They fought off the local city guard that tried to stop them and fled the city. Of the 200 who started the revolt, only about 75 managed to escape. A small number. A desperate, ragged band of runaway slaves and gladiators. They needed a defensible position, a place to regroup and plan. And they found one. They climbed the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, the great volcano that loomed over the entire region. Imagine that scene. 75 men, standing on the wild, vine-covered slopes of a sleeping volcano. Below them, the rich, orderly fields and villas of the Roman countryside stretched out. They could see the roads, the aqueducts, the symbols of the empire that had enslaved them. They were free. For the first time. The air they breathed did not belong to a master. The ground they stood on was not a cage. They were battered, they were few, and they were surrounded by the most powerful empire on earth. But they were free. Rome, at first, dismissed them. A minor slave revolt. A nuisance. They sent a small militia force to deal with it, expecting to quickly crush the runaways. They did not understand who they were dealing with. They did not understand the fire that had been forged in the Ludus. Spartacus and his men were trapped on the volcano, but they were not cornered. They were waiting. They were free, but they were also fugitives. Rome would not let this humiliation stand. They would send soldiers. And Spartacus knew that the real fight had only just begun. In Rome, the news of the breakout from Capua was met not with alarm, but with annoyance. A minor slave revolt. A nuisance. It was a matter for the police, not the legions. The Senate, preoccupied with political intrigue and more important wars abroad, dispatched a praetor named Gaius Claudius Glaber with a hastily assembled militia of about 3,000 men. They were not hardened legionaries, they were civic guards, men who were likely more comfortable policing a marketplace than scaling a volcano. Glaber arrived at the base of Mount Vesuvius with the overconfidence of a man who believes his opponent is not his equal. He saw that there was only one known road leading up the mountain where the rebels were camped. His strategy was simple, logical, and catastrophically wrong. He would not risk his men by climbing the mountain to fight them. He would simply blockade the road. He would lay siege to the volcano itself. He would let the mountain and starvation do the work for him. With their only escape route cut off, the rebels would either have to surrender from hunger or attempt a suicidal charge down the road into his waiting forces. Glaber set up his camp, posted his sentries, and waited. On the slopes of Vesuvius, Spartacus and his men looked down at the Roman camp. They were trapped. Their initial euphoria of freedom was quickly turning into the cold reality of their situation. Their food was running out. They were a tiny band of 75 men against a force of 3,000. It seemed like the rebellion was destined to end here. A forgotten footnote on the side of a volcano. But Spartacus was not a common slave. He was a Thracian warrior and a former Roman auxiliary. He understood Roman tactics. And he knew their greatest weakness, arrogance. He knew Glaber would be watching the road. He would not be watching the cliff. Spartacus looked not at the Roman camp below, but at the mountain itself. He saw what Glaber did not. He saw the wild, thick grapevines that clung to the sheer rock faces on the other side of the mountain, a side considered impassable. And a plan began to form. A plan of desperate genius. He set his men to work. Silently, they gathered the long, tough vines. They began to weave them, braiding them together, creating long, sturdy ladders. It was slow, painstaking work, done with bleeding hands and whispered instructions. They were not forging weapons of war. They were forging a path to survival out of the very fabric of their prison. Under the cover of a moonless night, the escape began. One by one, Spartacus and his men carried their vine ladders to the edge of a steep, unguarded cliff. They secured them to the rocks and trees. And then, in near total silence, they began their descent. Imagine the terror. Lowering yourself down a sheer rock face in the dark, your life depending on a ladder woven from plants. The only sounds were the scrape of feet against rock, the rustle of leaves, and the pounding of your own heart. One snapped vine, one dislodged rock, and the entire plan would end in a silent fall. But the vines held. One by one, the 75 men reached the bottom, their movements as silent as ghosts. They had done the impossible. They were off the mountain. But the plan was not just to escape. It was to attack. They circled the base of the mountain, approaching Glaber's camp from the rear, the side he had left completely undefended. The Roman militia was sleeping, comfortable in their tents, confident that their enemies were starving and trapped above them. They had posted no sentries on this side. Why would they? No one could come from the cliffs. Spartacus's force fell upon the sleeping Roman camp like a wolf pack on a flock of sheep. The attack was a complete and total surprise. The rebels stormed the camp. The silence of the night shattered by their battle cries. The Roman militia, woken from their sleep, were thrown into absolute panic. They had no time to form ranks. No time to even properly grasp their weapons. They were cut down in their tents or fled into the darkness in terror. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter. By dawn, it was over. Glaber's force was scattered and destroyed. The rebel gladiators, the desperate slaves, stood victorious amidst the abandoned Roman camp. And in that camp were treasures more valuable than gold. Real Roman weapons. Real Roman armor. Shields, swords, spears, helmets. They shed their rags and their makeshift weapons. They armed themselves as a proper Roman cohort. They were no longer a band of runaway slaves. They now looked, and felt, like an army. News of this impossible victory spread like wildfire through the Italian countryside. The story was told and retold in the slave quarters of every villa. A Roman praetor, defeated. A Roman force, annihilated. By a handful of gladiators who climbed down a volcano on ladders made of vines. The army of the desperate now had a name. And a symbol. Thousands of other slaves, herdsmen, and outcasts began to hear the name of Spartacus, and they looked towards Vesuvius with a new and dangerous hope. Spartacus and his rebellion took place in the final chaotic days of the Roman Republic. The gladiator games of his time were brutal, but they were often held in simpler, wooden amphitheaters. But after the Republic fell, and the age of emperors began, the scale of everything changed. The games needed a new home. A cathedral of carnage. A stage worthy of an empire at the height of its power. Rome needed the Colosseum. It was officially known as the Flavian Amphitheater, a project started by Emperor Vespasian around 70 AD and completed by his son, Titus, in 80 AD. Think about that. This colossal structure, the largest amphitheater ever built, was constructed in under a decade. They didn't have CAD software, power cranes, or union-mandated coffee breaks. They had Roman concrete, travertine stone, complex wooden scaffolding, and tens of thousands of slaves and laborers, many of them brought to Rome after the Jewish War. The scale is difficult to comprehend even today. The Colosseum stood nearly 160 feet tall, about the height of a 15-story building. It was a massive ellipse, over 600 feet long and 500 feet wide. It could hold, depending on the estimate, anywhere from 50,000 to 80,000 spectators. That's the capacity of a modern NFL stadium. And the genius of its design was not just in its size, but in its efficiency. Look at the exterior. A masterpiece of classical architecture. 3 tiers of arches rise one on top of the other, a perfect, repeating pattern. Each tier used a different architectural order. The strong, simple Doric on the bottom, the more elegant Ionic in the middle, and the ornate Corinthian at the top. It was a visual lesson in architectural strength and beauty. But the true genius was in crowd control. The Romans understood that getting 50,000 excited, possibly drunk, citizens in and out of a venue quickly was crucial to avoiding riots. So they designed a system of 80 ground floor entrances and exits, known as vomitoria. The name comes from the Latin word vomere, meaning, to spew forth. Because that is what it looked like after the games, the great building appearing to vomit its massive crowd out into the streets in a matter of minutes. Every ticket holder had a designated gate, stairway, and section. It was a system so efficient that modern stadium designers still study it today. And what about the comfort of those spectators? An entire day of games under the brutal Roman sun would be unbearable. The Romans had a solution for that, too. And it is one of the most astonishing feats of their engineering. It was called the velarium. This was a gigantic, retractable awning made of canvas that covered the entire open-air arena. Imagine a massive, sail-like roof, held up by a complex network of ropes, pulleys, and 240 tall wooden masts that were socketed into the top story of the Colosseum. To operate this massive contraption, to raise and lower the sails according to the sun and wind, the Romans employed a special detachment of experienced sailors from the imperial navy, the Misenum fleet. Let that sink in. They used navy sailors to operate the roof of their stadium. Inside, the seating was a perfect mirror of Rome's rigid social structure. The best seats, right down by the action, were for the emperor and the Vestal virgins. The next tiers were for the senators and the equestrian class. As you went up, the social status went down. The middle sections were for ordinary Roman citizens, the plebeians. And the very top section, the nosebleed seats with the worst view, was for the common poor, slaves, and women. Your ticket told you not just where to sit, but exactly where you stood in the Roman world. The Colosseum was more than a building. It was a statement. A gift from the Flavian emperors to the people of Rome, a symbol of the empire's wealth, power, and engineering prowess. It was the center of the Roman universe. But the true genius, and the true horror, of the Colosseum was not what the crowd could see. It was what they couldn't see. A labyrinth of death, hidden directly beneath the sand of the arena floor. The Colosseum was a triumph of public-facing architecture. Every arch, every column, every seating tier was designed to impress the eye and manage the masses. But the true genius of the building, the dark, beating heart of this entertainment machine, was hidden from view. It lay directly beneath the wooden, sand-covered floor of the arena. It was called the hypogeum. The name literally means underground, but that simple word does no justice to the reality. The hypogeum was a vast, two-level subterranean network of tunnels, corridors, chambers, and cells. It was the backstage of death. A cramped, dark, and terrifying labyrinth where the spectacle was prepared before being unleashed upon the sunlit world above. If you were to descend into the hypogeum, the first thing you would notice is the sudden drop in temperature, and the overwhelming change in sound and smell. The roar of the 80,000 spectators above would be muffled into a low, thunderous drone, the sound of a distant, angry god. The air here was thick with the smells of animal musk, sweat, fear, and damp stone. It was lit by torches, their flickering light casting long, distorted shadows that danced on the walls, making the narrow passageways feel even more claustrophobic. This underground world was a holding area for the three main types of performers. First, the gladiators. They would wait in small holding cells, hearing the roar of the crowd, the sounds of the combat happening just a few feet above their heads. They would listen to the fate of their predecessors, trying to guess the mood of the audience, the anxiety building with every cheer and every groan that filtered down through the floorboards. Second, the Noxii, the condemned. These were criminals, prisoners of war, or religious dissenters sentenced to die in the arena. They were held here with no hope of survival, waiting for their turn to be thrown to wild beasts or forced to fight to the death in gruesome public executions. And third, the animals. The hypogeum contained dozens of pens and cages holding exotic beasts captured from every corner of the Roman Empire. Lions from North Africa, bears from Caledonia, tigers from Parthia, crocodiles from the Nile, rhinoceroses, and elephants. The snarling, roaring, and pacing of these terrified and angry animals would echo through the stone tunnels, creating a constant, terrifying soundscape. But the hypogeum was not just a storage facility. It was an intricate piece of stage machinery, and its greatest secret was a system of elevators and trapdoors. The wooden floor of the arena above was not solid. It was dotted with as many as 32 hidden trapdoors. Beneath these trapdoors, in the hypogeum, was a series of complex wooden elevators, or pegmata. These were not powered by electricity, but by the brute force of hundreds of slaves turning massive capstans and pulling on a complex system of ropes and counterweights. The process was a marvel of grim engineering. Imagine this: in the darkness below, a cage containing a hungry lion is wheeled onto an elevator platform. Above, in the sunlit arena, a gladiator is fighting. The crowd is getting bored. The emperor gives a subtle signal. Down below, a foreman barks an order. Dozens of slaves throw their weight onto the capstans. The ropes go taut. Silently, the elevator platform, carrying the caged lion, begins to rise through the darkness. Simultaneously, stagehands above prepare the trapdoor. On another signal, they pull away the bolts. The trapdoor flies open. The elevator platform rises flush with the arena floor, and the cage door is opened from below. And suddenly, as if from thin air, a roaring lion appears in the middle of the arena, to the absolute shock and delight of the 80,000 spectators. This system allowed for incredible stagecraft. Gladiators, scenery, and wild animals could be introduced into the games at any moment, creating constant surprises and dramatic tension. It was the world's first, and most deadly, special effects system. This hidden world was the engine room of the ship of death. A place of profound contrast. Above, sunlight, cheering crowds, and imperial grandeur. Below, darkness, fear, the smell of caged animals. And men waiting for their turn to die. The lions and bears waiting in the dark were not just for show. They were the stars of the opening act of a day at the games. They were ready for the Venetians. The wild beast hunts. The hypogeum was not merely a waiting room, it was a launch bay for a carefully choreographed day of state-sponsored slaughter. The events in the Colosseum were an all-day affair, and the gladiatorial combats were often reserved for the afternoon's main event. The morning belonged to the beasts. This part of the show was called the Venatio. The wild beast hunt. A horn would blast, and the trapdoors of the arena would fly open. The crowd would roar as exotic and terrifying creatures, blinded by the sudden sunlight, were hoisted into the arena. This was not a simple, one-on-one fight. The Roman imagination for carnage was far more creative than that. They staged elaborate matchups. A pack of German hounds against a massive bear. A rhinoceros against an elephant. A bull against a tiger. It was a brutal fantasy menagerie brought to life, a bloody display of the vast reach of the Roman Empire, which could pluck these creatures from the farthest corners of the known world for the amusement of its citizens. Sometimes, trained hunters called venators would enter the arena. Unlike gladiators, they were lightly armed with spears, bows, or daggers, relying on skill and agility to take down their prey. They were the stars of the morning show, celebrated for their courage and precision. The scale of the slaughter is almost impossible to comprehend. For the inaugural games of the Colosseum in 80 AD, the Emperor Titus presided over 100 days of spectacle. Historical accounts claim that over 9,000 wild animals were killed during that period alone. Think of that. 90 animals per day. Every day. For over 3 months. The demand for exotic beasts was so high that it had a real, devastating ecological impact. The North African elephant was hunted to extinction. Lions, tigers, and hippos vanished from regions where they had once been plentiful, like Libya and Egypt. The Roman arena was not just consuming men, it was consuming the natural world. But if slaughtering thousands of animals in manufactured hunting scenarios wasn't spectacular enough, the Romans had another, even more audacious trick up their sleeves. An event so extravagant, so technically complex, it defies belief. The Naumachia. The mock naval battle. Yes. They flooded the Colosseum. Using a complex system of aqueducts and sluice gates. Engineers could fill the entire arena floor with several feet of water in a matter of hours, turning the massive stone amphitheater into a miniature, artificial lake. Then, specially built, scaled-down warships, replicas of real Roman and enemy vessels, would be brought into the arena. Thousands of men, usually condemned prisoners or prisoners of war, were forced onto these ships. They were divided into two navies, and were ordered to reenact a famous historical sea battle, like the Battle of Salamis between the Greeks and Persians. And they would fight to the death. Imagine the scene from the stands. You are sitting there, on a hot afternoon, and the sandy floor you just saw men and animals dying on is now a shimmering body of water. Real ships, with real men, are ramming into each other, splintering wood, and sinking. Men are thrown into the water, fighting with swords, trying to board enemy vessels. Or simply drowning a few feet from the marble seats of the senators. It was the ultimate display of Roman power and wealth. An act of such supreme confidence and extravagance that it sent a clear message: we are Rome. We are so powerful, we can move oceans. We are so rich. We can build entire fleets just to destroy them for an afternoon's entertainment. The logistics were staggering. The cost, astronomical. And the loss of life, immense. All for a show. All of this, the beast hunts, the naval battles, the gladiators themselves, served a purpose far greater than simple entertainment. It was not mere bloodlust. It was a sophisticated and deeply cynical tool of political control. It was a strategy known as panem et circenses. Bread and circuses. Why? That is the question that echoes through the empty arches of the Colosseum today. Why the incredible expense? Why the astonishing engineering? Why the relentless, industrialized slaughter of thousands of men and beasts? To say it was simply for entertainment is to misunderstand Rome entirely. The blood and sand of the arena were not just for fun. They were for control. The Roman poet Juvenal, writing with a deep cynicism in the late 1st and early 2nd century AD, lamented the state of his people. He wrote that the citizens of Rome, who had once conquered the world and governed themselves, now cared for only two things. His famous phrase for it was panem et circenses. Bread and circuses. This wasn't just a witty line. It was a razor-sharp analysis of the most effective tool of political control in the history of the empire. To understand it, you must first understand the city of Rome itself. It was not a peaceful, orderly metropolis. It was a massive, teeming, and dangerously volatile city, home to over 1 million people. A huge portion of this population was the plebs, the common people. Many were unemployed, had lost their ancestral farms, and now lived crammed into flammable, unsanitary apartment blocks called insulae. They were poor, they were bored, and they were a mob. A hungry, restless mob that could, and often did, riot and burn down parts of the city if they felt neglected. The emperors, from Augustus onwards, understood this threat. Keeping the mob of Rome happy, or at least distracted, was not a matter of kindness. It was a matter of political survival. And their solution had two parts. First, panem. Bread. The Roman state organized one of the most extensive welfare programs in the ancient world. A massive grain dole provided free or heavily subsidized grain to hundreds of thousands of Roman citizens. Fleets of ships sailed constantly from the fertile provinces of Egypt and North Africa, the breadbaskets of the empire, to keep the capital fed. This prevented mass starvation, yes. But more importantly, it prevented food riots. A man with a full belly is less likely to overthrow an emperor. But a full belly is not enough if the mind is bored and resentful. And that is where the second, more spectacular part of the equation comes in. Circenses. Circuses. The games. The gladiatorial games, the beast hunts, the chariot races. And the mock naval battles were not just sporting events. They were a form of mass distraction. A state-sponsored opiate for the masses. They gave the people a thrilling, violent, and utterly absorbing spectacle to focus their passions on. Why worry about your crumbling apartment building or your lack of political power when you can go to the Colosseum for free and watch a lion fight a bear? Why resent the obscene wealth of the senators when you can cheer for your favorite gladiator and feel like a part of something grand? The games were a form of mass catharsis. A way to channel the public's aggressive and frustrated energies into a controlled, state-approved outlet. The violence in the arena kept violence off the streets. And at the center of it all was the emperor. He was the ultimate editor, the sponsor of the games. By providing this incredible, free entertainment, he presented himself not as a distant ruler, but as a generous benefactor, the father of his people. His presence at the games was a performance in itself. He would sit in the imperial box, wave to the crowd, and sometimes even respond to their pleas or demands. The crowd's reaction was a kind of living public opinion poll. They would cheer for the emperor when he arrived. They could shout slogans, praise his victories, or even voice their displeasure. An emperor who put on good games was a popular emperor. An emperor who was stingy with the entertainment was seen as weak or uncaring. It was a brilliant, deeply cynical contract. The people traded their political power and their civic engagement for free food and spectacular, bloody entertainment. And the emperors, in return, secured their power and the stability of the city. So, when you look at the Colosseum, do not see just a sports stadium. See a carefully calibrated instrument of social control. Every cheer for a dying gladiator was a cheer for the emperor who provided the show. Every gasp at a wild beast was a moment the public wasn't thinking about rebellion. But this grand system of pacification was not free. It was built on a vast, complex, and brutal economy. An economy that required a constant supply of a very specific, and very human, resource. Bread and circuses. A simple, brilliant formula for political control. The bread was relatively straightforward, a matter of supply chains and logistics. But the circuses? The circuses were an entirely different beast. They were complex, wildly expensive, and built on a brutal, fascinating economy all their own. Nothing in Rome was truly free. So who, exactly, was paying the bill for all this blood? The primary sponsor of the games was known as the editor. This was usually the emperor himself, or a wealthy magistrate, a senator, a general, anyone seeking to curry favor with the public. Sponsoring a day of games was the Roman equivalent of a massive, modern-day political campaign. It was an investment in popularity. A spectacular show meant your name would be cheered by 80,000 people. A cheap or boring show could get you booed out of public life. The stakes were high. But the editor didn't own the gladiators. He didn't train them. For that, he went to another key figure in this economy. The man we met earlier. The lanista. The lanista was the owner, the manager, and the CEO of a gladiator school. He was a businessman, and his product was violence. His entire business model was built on a supply chain of human flesh. First, there was acquisition. He would buy raw material at slave markets, strong prisoners of war, condemned criminals, or indebted men who sold themselves into servitude. A strong Gaul or a fierce Thracian was a promising, if risky, investment. Next, came research and development, the training. This was the most expensive part. For years, the lanista would invest in his gladiators, feeding them, housing them, and paying for an entire staff of trainers, armorers, and doctors to turn them into skilled performers. Finally, the sale. A lanista would then rent out his stable of gladiators to an editor for a specific set of games. The editor paid a hefty fee for each performer. And this is where the popular myth of gladiator combat, the one you've seen in movies, begins to fall apart. This is the great, quiet shock of the arena. Because gladiators were such expensive, highly trained assets, the lanista had absolutely no financial interest in seeing them die. A top-tier, famous gladiator was a superstar. He was a walking, breathing financial portfolio. He could be rented out for games across the empire for enormous sums. Killing him would be like a modern football team owner intentionally injuring his star quarterback. It was just bad business. For this reason, most gladiatorial matches were not fought to the death. The rules were often complex, overseen by a referee. A fight would typically end when one man was wounded, disarmed, or so exhausted he could no longer defend himself. At this point, he would surrender, often by dropping his shield and raising a single finger. The decision of his fate then fell to the editor, who would often gauge the mood of the crowd. If the gladiator had fought bravely and was popular, the crowd would cheer and wave handkerchiefs, and the editor would likely spare him, giving the missio, or release. He lived to fight, and earn money for his lanista, another day. Death, of course, was always a possibility. If a gladiator fought poorly, or if the crowd was particularly bloodthirsty, the editor might give the infamous thumbs down signal, and the victor would be obliged to execute his opponent. But here is the crucial economic detail: if an editor demanded a gladiator's death, the contract stipulated he had to pay the lanista a death fee. This fee was exorbitant, sometimes as much as 50 times the original rental price. It was financial compensation for the destruction of a valuable asset. Death was always an option, but it was an expensive one. And in Rome, nothing discouraged an action more effectively than a high price tag. Historians analyzing the data believe that in the early empire, a gladiator had roughly a 90% chance of surviving any given match. On top of this, there was a massive gambling industry built around the games. People bet on everything: which fighter would win, who would draw first blood, how long a match would last. The lanista, the gladiators themselves, and wealthy patrons could all profit from these wagers. So you see, the arena floor was not just a stage for duels. It was a stock exchange of violence. A marketplace where human lives were assets, where death had a price tag, and where the most important victory was often the financial one. To protect these valuable investments, the lanista didn't just rely on luck or the mercy of the crowd. He employed some of the most advanced medical professionals of his time. Because a wounded gladiator who could be healed was an asset that could continue to generate revenue. So, the games were a business. The gladiators were assets. And in any good business, you protect your assets. An investment worth a small fortune needs a first-class maintenance plan. For a Roman gladiator, that maintenance plan was not a mechanic, but a doctor. And paradoxically, these men, destined for violent spectacle, received some of the most advanced medical care in the ancient world. While the average Roman citizen with an ailment might be treated by a local herbalist with prayers, dubious potions, and the standard theory of balancing their humors, a gladiator was different. He was too valuable for superstition. Every major ludus had its own dedicated medical station, a valetudinarium, staffed by skilled physicians, or medici. The lanista, the pragmatic businessman, knew that a top gladiator out of action with an injury was a loss of revenue. A gladiator who died from an infected wound that could have been treated was a catastrophic financial write-off. Therefore, the health of his fighters was a top priority. This created a strange, gruesome, but highly effective environment for medical advancement. The gladiator school became a laboratory of trauma. The doctors there saw, on a daily basis, the kind of injuries that a normal physician might never encounter in a lifetime. They saw deep sword cuts, trident punctures, mace wounds, and complex fractures. This constant exposure to the inner workings of the human body gave them an unparalleled, hands-on education in anatomy, surgery, and wound treatment. While human dissection was largely forbidden in the Roman world, these doctors didn't need to dissect corpses. They learned from the living. From the open wounds of the men they were paid to patch up. They became specialists in trauma surgery. They understood the importance of cleaning wounds, even if they didn't understand germ theory. They knew how to stitch arteries and tendons, how to set bones with precision, and how to perform amputations as a last resort. They developed specialized surgical tools, probes, scalpels, and hooks designed for extracting broken weapon fragments from flesh. The most famous example of this strange medical ecosystem is a man who is arguably the most influential physician in Western history after Hippocrates. His name was Galen of Pergamon. Before he became the personal physician to Roman emperors, before his theories would dominate European medicine for over 1,000 years, Galen began his career in the 120s AD in a humble but demanding position. He was the chief physician to the Gladiator school in his home city of Pergamon. For 4 years, Galen treated the horrific injuries of the arena's performers. He later wrote that this experience was his window into the body. He learned more about anatomy, muscles, and the nervous system from patching up wounded gladiators than from any textbook. He boasted that under his care, only a handful of gladiators died from their wounds. A remarkable achievement for the time. Much of the foundation of what we now consider early anatomy and surgical practice was built upon the broken bodies of these men, their suffering inadvertently advancing the cause of medicine. The irony is profound. A common Roman citizen with a fever would be subjected to bloodletting and prayers. A wealthy senator with gout would be told to change his diet. But a slave, a gladiator, with a deep gash in his thigh, would receive the direct attention of some of the most skilled surgeons of the ancient world. His wound would be cleaned, his muscles stitched, his recovery managed by professionals. In ancient Rome, if you wanted the best emergency medical care, your best bet was to get stabbed in front of a large, cheering crowd. Of course, this care was not born from compassion. It was born from commerce. The gladiator was healed not because his life had inherent value, but because his life had a market value. He was repaired like a prized chariot, polished like a valuable vase, also he could be sent back into the arena to risk it all again. But even with this surprisingly advanced medical care and the powerful financial incentive to keep them alive, the games were still a world defined by death. And like all blood sports, all empires built on spectacle, their time would eventually come to an end. The games were the heartbeat of Rome. A brutal, magnificent, and seemingly eternal institution. For over 500 years, the sand of the arena drank the blood of men and beasts for the amusement of the masses. It seemed impossible that it could ever end. But all empires fall. And all of their favorite pastimes eventually fade into history. The fall of the gladiatorial games was not a sudden event. It was a long, slow decline, brought about by two irresistible forces that Rome could no longer control: bankruptcy and belief. First, the money simply began to run out. The golden age of the Colosseum, with its 100-day festivals and mock naval battles, was a product of an empire at the peak of its wealth and stability. But by the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, the Roman Empire was in a state of near-constant crisis. Invasions from barbarian tribes, endless civil wars, and rampant inflation were draining the treasury. It is hard to justify spending a fortune on importing lions from Africa when you need that money to pay the legions defending the Rhine. It is difficult to fund a 1,000-man sea battle when the villas that pay the taxes for it are being sacked by Goths. The sheer expense of the games became unsustainable. The grand spectacles grew less frequent, smaller in scale. The era of emperors trying to outdo one another with sheer extravagance was over. The circuses, part of the bread and circuses equation, was becoming too expensive to maintain. But the deeper change was not economic. It was spiritual. A new faith was rising across the empire. A faith that saw the arena not as a place of glorious entertainment, but as a pit of mortal sin. That faith was Christianity. For centuries, Christians themselves had been victims of the arena, thrown to the lions or forced to fight as part of imperial persecutions. To them, the Colosseum was not a place of amusement. It was a place of martyrdom. Their philosophy was diametrically opposed to the values of the games. Where Roman paganism celebrated martial valor and a glorious death, Christianity preached mercy, compassion, and the sanctity of every human life. As Christianity grew from a persecuted sect into the dominant religion of the empire, culminating in Emperor Constantine's conversion in the early 4th century, the cultural tide began to turn against the games. Christian emperors began to divert state funds away from pagan spectacles and towards the building of churches. The moral foundation of the games was crumbling. The final death blow, according to legend, came in the form of a single, defiant act of faith. The story is told of a monk from the east named Saint Telemachus. Around the year 404 AD, he traveled to Rome and, horrified by what he saw, decided to intervene. During a gladiatorial contest in the Colosseum, he rushed into the arena itself, stood between the two fighters, and pleaded with them and the crowd to stop the bloodshed in the name of Christ. The crowd, enraged at having their entertainment interrupted, did not listen. They saw him as a fanatic spoiling their fun. They began to throw stones at him. The gladiators, unsure what to do, stood back as the monk was stoned to death by the furious mob, right there on the sand. The story goes that the Christian emperor of the time, Honorius, was so shocked and shamed by this act of martyrdom that he was moved to act decisively. Shortly after Telemachus's death, he issued the final edict, officially banning all gladiatorial combat throughout the Roman Empire forever. The historical accuracy of the Telemachus story is debated. But whether it happened exactly that way or not, it represents the final clash of two worlds. The pagan world of blood sport, and the new Christian world of piety and mercy. The era of men fighting men for sport was over. The beast hunts, the venations, continued for another century or so, but the heart of the Colosseum's purpose had been torn out. The great building began its long, slow decay. It was damaged by earthquakes, stripped of its marble and metal by builders in the Middle Ages, and slowly became the magnificent, broken ruin we see today. The gladiators were gone. The lannistas were out of business. The roar of the crowd fell silent. But the echo of the arena, the deep, human fascination with spectacle, with vicarious violence, and with larger-than-life performers, that did not die. It simply found new stages. The Colosseum began its long sleep, slowly crumbling into the magnificent ruin we see today. The lannistas closed their schools. The gladiators, as a profession, vanished from the world. The games were over. But were they? The stones may have fallen silent, but the echo of the arena never truly disappeared. The ghost of the gladiator did not die, it simply found new stages, new costumes, and new audiences. It lives on. Even now, in our modern world. First, it lives in our stories. The gladiator has become one of the most powerful and enduring archetypes in Western culture. He is the ultimate symbol of the underdog, the noble slave fighting for freedom, the lone man defying an empire. We see him in Stanley Kubrick's 1960 epic, Spartacus, where Kirk Douglas became the face of righteous rebellion. We see him, most famously, in Ridley Scott's 2000 masterpiece, Gladiator, where Russell Crowe's Maximus embodies the warrior's code of honor, strength, and vengeance. These films, while romanticizing many aspects of the truth, capture the essence of the gladiator's appeal, the high stakes, the personal drama, and the profound struggle for dignity in a world designed to strip it away. The gladiator is no longer just a historical figure, he is a myth. But his legacy is more direct, more tangible, and perhaps more unsettling than just stories on a screen. Did the arena ever truly close? Or did it just change its name to Madison Square Garden, to Wembley Stadium, to the T-Mobile Arena? Think of the modern superstar athlete. A boxer, an NFL player, an MMA fighter. He is, in many ways, the gladiator's direct descendant. Like the gladiator, he is an entertainer whose performance is based on physical prowess, skill, and the risk of spectacular violence. He is an immensely valuable asset, owned not by a lanista, but by a team owner or a promotional company. His contract is worth millions. He is idolized by the masses, his name chanted by thousands of fans. And like the gladiator, he puts his body on the line for our entertainment. We watch from the safety of our seats or our couches as these men endure concussions, torn ligaments, and broken bones. We gasp at a knockout punch in a UFC fight. We cheer at a bone-jarring tackle in a football game. The average career of an NFL player is brutally short due to the sheer physical toll. Is it so different from a gladiator who was lucky enough to fight, survive, and retire? The business surrounding it is the same. The astronomical sums paid for television rights, the lucrative endorsement deals, the massive, multi-billion-dollar sports betting industry that thrives on the outcome of these contests. It is the economy of blood, just polished with corporate logos and high-definition replays. The crowd, too, is a familiar echo. We paint our faces in team colors, we wear the jerseys of our favorite players. We roar with triumph when our hero scores, and we scream with fury at the opposing team, the enemy. We are the Roman mob, our passions channeled into a new kind of arena. Our thirst for spectacle just as unquenchable. We have, of course, civilized the spectacle. The goal is no longer to kill, but to score points, to win by knockout or submission. We have replaced the swords and tridents with boxing gloves and leather footballs. The vanquished are not executed on the sand, they are helped up by medical staff. But have we truly removed the bloodlust? Or have we just found more socially acceptable ways to satisfy it? The ghost of the gladiator lives on. In every athlete who sacrifices their long-term health for a few years of glory, in every roaring stadium, and in our own deep, primal fascination with watching human beings push themselves to the absolute limit of their physical and mental endurance. The Colosseum may be a ruin, but the questions it asks are still very much alive. Which brings us back to the central lesson of the arena, a lesson not just about Rome, but about us. So the ghost of the gladiator still walks among us, in our stadiums and on our screens. The echo of the Colosseum is found in every roar of a modern sports crowd. But what is the final lesson he has to teach us? What is the ultimate truth to be found in the sand? We began this journey as one man. A captured warrior stripped of his name and forced into the ludus. We learned through his eyes that the fight was not for honor, but for performance. We then zoomed out and saw that this performance was not just for sport, but was a key instrument in the vast political machine of bread and circuses, designed to keep a restless population distracted and pacified. We saw that this machine was funded by a complex and brutal economy, where human lives were treated as valuable, reparable assets. And we saw that this cold, economic logic led to surprisingly advanced medical care, a grim testament to the value placed on a good show. When you piece it all together, you realize the Colosseum was more than just a stage for violence. It was a mirror held up to Rome itself. In its magnificent arches and engineering, it reflected Rome's genius and power. In the exotic beasts dragged from every corner of the earth, it reflected the immense reach of its empire. In the brutal efficiency of the games, it reflected the ruthless pragmatism that had conquered the world. And in its primary purpose, to distract and control its own citizens, it reflected Rome's deepest, most abiding fear. The fear of its own people. The fear that the great, unstable mob at the heart of the empire could, at any moment, rise up and tear it all down. The games were a spectacle of power, yes. But they were born from an anxiety about powerlessness. And what does it say about us, that we are still so fascinated by it? Why, for thousands of years, have human beings been drawn to the spectacle of organized, controlled conflict? Is it a simple, base bloodlust? A flaw in our nature? Or is it something more complex? Perhaps in watching the gladiator face his mortality, we are able to confront our own from a safe distance. Perhaps in cheering for a victor, we experience a cathartic release of our own aggressive instincts. Perhaps we are simply drawn to stories of extreme pressure and ultimate endurance, because it reminds us of the strength that lies dormant within our own species. The questions are as eternal as the ruins of the Colosseum itself. But in the end, behind all the politics and all the philosophy, there was a man standing on the sand. A man like the one you became at the start of our story. His life was brutal, often short, and built upon the whims of others. His suffering was real. His fear was real. And his endurance was magnificent. He was a symbol, an asset, a performer. But he was also a human being who learned to survive in an impossible world, who found a strange form of dignity in a profession designed to strip it all away. That, perhaps, is the final echo. Not the roar of the crowd, but the quiet, steady heartbeat of a single man, standing in the center of the world, refusing to fall. It is a story of our own complex relationship with the spectacle of struggle. A story to reflect on, as you let the silence settle. And so, the story of the gladiator is a story about all of us. A story of our own complex relationship with the spectacle of struggle. A story to reflect on, as you let the silence settle. The echoes of Rome have faded for tonight. The great Colosseum now stands only in our memory. But there are other stories, other worlds, waiting in the shadows of history. Perhaps in our next journey together, we will walk the dusty, lawless streets of the American Wild West. Or perhaps we will sail the high seas under the black flag of a pirate captain. Or maybe, we will uncover the secrets of a forgotten queen, her body wrapped in crimson and mystery. But those are journeys for another night. For tonight, your journey is over. Let the sand of the arena settle. Let the roar of the crowd become a whisper, and then, nothing. You are not in an ancient city. You are here, in your own quiet space. You are safe. You are warm. You are at peace. All the battles have been fought. All the stories have been told. All that is left is rest. Deep, quiet, and profound rest. May your dreams be peaceful. Good night.
you.